All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are going to continue our discussion of Darwin and the creation of his theory of evolution. And today we're going to really talk about a quintessential event in his life. This really becomes the major turning point for his theory, and he doesn't even know it while he's experiencing it. So, Darwin's research really is going to end up focusing on adaptation, this idea of descent with modification, this natural selection. But the event that culminates all of that research is his voyage on the Beagle. So, let me give you a little background on Darwin's story. So, Darwin comes from a sort of middle upper class family living in Great Britain in the 1800s. He's got decent schooling, he really doesn't have a want for much, but he's floundering. So by the time he gets into his early 20s, he has already tried to go to what we would consider college to become a clergyman, somebody who works in the church, failed. Tried to go to medical school, spent his first day in an operating room, and puked at the first sight of blood. Failed out of medical school. And so by this point, he thinks he wants to be a naturalist. Wants to study nature. And his dad basically tells him, get a life, get a job, get some training. Being a naturalist is not a real thing. So his dad tells him, figure your life out, right? Like, basically, I'm done trying to support you. And so he takes this job on the Beagle. And the Beagle's commission is to go mapping the coast of South America. So this is the height of British colonial period. They're out to kind of stake their claim into every piece of land they can find. Think about this is not too long after the American Revolution, right? We're talking 40 years, 50 years at the most, right? And so Darwin goes on this ship as a companion to the captain. Don't know how many of you are sitting out there going, well, what the hell does that mean? Sort of my first inkling at the time that I heard it first. And think about it. We're talking 1800s. Unless you were sort of really middle upper class or higher, your education, if you had any, probably stopped at like what we would say equivalent of fourth, fifth, maybe sixth grade. Okay, if that. So the vast majority of the men working on this ship are all but illiterate. They can't read to save their life. The captain, on the other hand, would be a gentleman who would be of a much higher social status. And so he would be well-read, well-trained, educated. And so he's going to spend months, years on this boat. He wants someone to talk to. He wants somebody who he can engage in intelligent dinner conversation with. That's where Darwin comes in. So Darwin gets on this boat, and they sail off. And unfortunately for Darwin, he's going to spend the vast majority of this trip puking over the side of the boat. Sort of a feeble man, if you haven't put this together yet. Gets terribly seasick. But in the process of going on this journey, he gets to see things that he never would have seen staying at home in Great Britain. He's going to experience seeing a skeleton of an ancient sloth. He's going to experience real sloths for the first time and make some connections between this giant sloth and the living ones he's seeing in the jungles. He gets to the Andes Mountains, and he's going to experience his first earthquake. And the earthquake in Chile is so dramatic that it actually causes the coastline where they're staying to rise by a few inches. It's actually measurable change. He goes to the top of the Andes Mountains and he finds fossils of seashells. Put that in context with experiencing that earthquake, and now he really starts understanding the work of Charles Lyell that he's reading on this journey, and how things like shifts in plate tectonics can cause changes to the landscape of Earth, and what that could potentially mean for the life that lives here. And of course, he's most famous for spending his time on the Galapagos. And while he's on the Galapagos, he sees organisms that don't exist anywhere else on Earth. And he takes all sorts of samples and data, drawings, notes, much of which he doesn't really go through and start digging into until he gets back home. But all of this experience, without it, we'd never know him. So he starts off on the voyage in 1831. He's 22. And again, the Beagle's primary mission is to chart these poorly known stretches of South American coastline, mostly for the purpose of Great Britain wanting to go in and claim the land. And again, Darwin spends most of his time observing and collecting specimens. If you ever get the chance to look at some of the primary documentation for the origin of species and just look at the insane amount of sketches and notes that he took, it's incredible. He's very detail oriented, he's very thorough, which ends up being incredibly beneficial because he doesn't really know what he's seeing at the time. It's not until he gets back to Great Britain that he starts piecing things together. So here's one of the interesting things, right? So he's in South America, he's seeing organisms that are similar to what he's used to in Great Britain, and then things that are clearly different from what he's used to seeing. So he gets this interesting look at Earth's diversity. He also sees the fossils. So there's the one of the giant sloth, and he's seeing living sloths, considerably smaller living sloths, for the first time. And so he's asking, well, how does this giant thing not exist anymore, but we have smaller living relatives of it? Again, the wheels start spinning. He's making notes. Again, he's reading Charles Lyell's work while on this journey. He experiences that earthquake and actually observes the rise in the coastline. He finds those ocean fossils at the top of the Andes Mountains. Push those two experiences together, and now he really gets a firsthand account of what Lyell is saying about how these plates and things like earthquakes can have dramatic effects on the way Earth is structured. And then, of course, the Galapagos, right? So things like our blue-footed boobies, the marine iguanas, the tortoises, these are all organisms that he spends a lot of time looking at. And the coolest thing is, because of the way that his trip took him, so they came down from Great Britain, down around the coastline, up the opposite side across Chile, and then they went to the Galapagos. So for all intents and purposes, their journey was over by the time they got to the Galapagos, at least as far as the commission of the Beagle's ship was concerned. So he's seen a lot by this point. And one of the coolest things that he starts to recognize as he's both here and then sees it even more when he goes back to his notes back home is that most of the animals that live on the Galapagos, first and foremost, are endemic to it, meaning that they don't live anywhere else. But there are distinct features of these endemic organisms that look similar to organisms that live off the coast of South America. Or I should say, on the coast of South America. And so, once again, remember he's reading Charles Lyell's work, and so he starts to put pieces together of could these islands have all been one structure that broke apart? And not only could all of these islands have been one landmass, but could that landmass have originated much closer to the coast of South America? So he starts, as he's island hopping here, suggesting perhaps this original main island was more or less right against the coast. So organisms like his finches, which is what he's most famous for, could have traveled back and forth from the mainland to the island. As that island drifted further away, that particular path for organisms to get to got cut off. Too much water in between. They were stuck on this island now. And then that island starts breaking apart. And same deal, right? So for short stints of time, and when I say short stints, we're talking geologic short stints. So this could still be thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years potentially. But they could still get back and forth. But as those islands got further and further apart, again, the ability to travel across that ocean decreases, land masses change, and so things evolve. And the break happens again and again and again, and that's where we get organisms that start off as one species and end up branching off on different islands. And again, this is what he's most famous for knowing, or discovering, or at least putting on paper, is his finches. This is his biggest sort of crowning evidence for what he experienced. And he doesn't even realize it at the time. He takes all of these different bird species, takes samples of them, takes notes of them, takes drawings of them, and when he gets back home, he assumed on the island that these all had to be different species of birds. But he gets back home and starts putting together that they're all finches. And although they look dramatically different, the differences are in their beaks, which is tied to the food that they eat. And so that's where this idea leads to this. And so he suggests that there is a reason for it, and the food sources are that driving force. So the Galapagos, we now know, are home to more than a dozen species. They're all closely related, but many of them, or at least some of them, I should say, are found only on a single island. And that's because when you go from island to island in the Galapagos, there are very unique ecosystems. There's very unique conditions. And so the food sources on those different islands are unique. What do birds use to eat? Their beaks, and so those beaks must be shaped appropriately for the food source they have. If we're talking about an organism who eats seeds, their beak shape is one type. If we're talking about insects, they're something different, right? So those shapes are driven by their ability to successfully eat. So go back to this. If we talk about species A here, that species would have had a variation in beak shape. Some would have been a little more successful than others, but they all had access to a variety of foods. They could all mate, and so they continued to stay as one species. But as those islands begin to break apart and the food sources begin to become more specific island to island, the organisms that started off here, well, when they get separated, they continue to be successful here, and so they stay as that species. As this changes, A now evolves into B, so a particular beak shape now becomes a little bit more predominant. Same thing happens again. That food source stays here with B, something different stays here on island C, and the beak shape adjusts again. So when we look at this, they all start off as a common ancestor that had diversity in the shape of that beak. That beak shape got adjusted time and time again as the islands changed, shifted, and they could no longer get back to the main population. So ultimately, Darwin puts together these ideas once he gets back to Great Britain, and eventually creates his work on the origin of species. And it really develops into two major ideas: that evolution itself explains life's unity as well as its diversity, and that natural selection is the actual process for this cause of adaptive evolution, that they're adapting to their environment based on the traits that they have. Now, Darwin never really uses the term natural selection. Instead, he talks about this concept of descent with modification, which we have now evolved into this process of natural selection. And so he talks about this unity of all life, that all organisms are related to each other so long as we go back far enough, so that we all come from common ancestry, and those ancestors have broken off and adapted to the environments that they're in, so that the traits have adjusted and changed to now match the environment that they're in. So really, that descent with modification looks kind of like a tree, right? We've got the common ancestor down here at the bottom, and as organisms moved into new environments, that meant a new set of traits was necessary for them to be successful, and assuming that the population had the traits in the variation that their population was bringing in, then that would become the set of traits that became more common because it's what allowed that subset of the population to be successful.